Hi guys. For today we're going to discuss film form. So let's first discuss about the concepts and principles of film form. All the greatest artwork involve us by engaging our feelings, senses, and cerebral processes. So it really doesn't matter if it's film, if it's visual art, poetry, literature. If it's an artwork, what it does is it involves us by engaging our feelings, the senses, the cerebral process. Artists greatly situate our craving for form. So it means that one of the things that an artist can master is creating his or her own style in terms of storytelling. A form is very important in any artwork. Artists give their works form to offer us a structured experience and draw us in. So, meaning, this is where artistry comes in. This is where creativity comes in, where the artist conjures up colors, conjures up figures, images, stories, and puts them together to create a work of art, which is a film. But how can it exactly draw us in? How can form actually draw us in? Now, form as a system, artistic form is highly connected to perception. Perception in relation to life as an activity. So, in order for artists to draw us in, they must unlock using their art our experiences so that we can relate to the artwork itself. Artworks rely on the human mind's intrinsic to instinct to holistically look at and unify elements into one. So they just give us, okay, artists just give us clues, they just give us structure, they just give us form, and then we ourselves make sense of it. We ourselves interpret the meaning of the artwork that we are presented. For film directors, uh, sorry, for film, directors expect us to connect sequences to form a larger narrative whole. Artists give their own work forms to offer us a structured experience. So this is where the auteur comes in. This is where the artistry of filmmaking comes in, where it gives us a narration and it gives us a series of images. Now it's up to the audience to basically experience that particular image that he or she is seeing. Um, Form as a system, the artwork and the person depends on each other. Okay, an artwork can only become an artwork if there are people or there is an audience that appreciate that particular work of art. Now without a person, an artwork would not function. It's just going to be a series of images for film and a combination of sounds, nothing more. So it becomes an artwork if the audience interprets it and appreciates it. How does the audience interpret and appreciate it? When they connect their own experiences and when they can relate to the story or the character in the story. Now, artwork presents cues that inspires us to be involved. These cues are organized into system, like a human body, okay, or a car engine. Even film has its own system. It becomes, in a way, a series or collection of systems that are presented together in order for it to tell a particular story. Okay? So, talking about film form, we have four factors. The overall system of relations that can be perceived among the elements in the entire motion picture. Now, form and style participate in the spectator experience. Okay? A system in a film is not a hodgepodge. As a viewer, we relate the elements present to one another. And film form is all about unity. Okay? So what this means is when you watch a film, so you actually decide as an audience, or the audience decides if he or she likes the film or not, if the film inspires them or not. How? Again, we have to relate it to the experiences of the audience. In a way, we have to connect with the audience. Without the audience, then this particular art form will not work. Film form can even make us perceive things anew, shaking us out of our accustomed habits and suggesting fresh ways of hearing, seeing, feeling, and thinking. To get a sense of the ways in which purely formal features can involve the audience, trying to follow experiment, assume, let's say, A is a series. What follows? So, I want you to imagine that you are watching a film that you have never watched before. So, in a way, when you first start watching a film, you have a set of expectations already. And then, patterns come in. Okay? Now, when you see a film about 10 to 15 minutes into it, if the film already hooks you up, okay, you somehow anticipate what will happen. Okay, this is A. This is the sequence that is presented to the audience. So, A, okay? So, what follows that particular sequence? Let's say, for example, when you watch something, okay, this is the, di ba, you already know, let's say, um, an actor or a character is presented, featured, and then described. Okay, so this is the main character. Immediately, you assume that it is the main character because the person or the character has a very, let's say, dominant exposure in the film. And then, somewhat okay. So this is the character, he is introduced or she is introduced. Now what follows? Okay? So imagine A is the first letter of that series. Okay? Now A was a Q. And on this basis, you made a formal hypothesis. Probably that the letters would run in alphabetical order. Your expectation was confirmed when you see the letter B, for example. What follows, A, B, most people will say C. But the form does not always follow the initial expectation. So, in film, for example, so, okay, you watch a particular film and you see an actor, then the actor comes in a situation, okay, okay, this is a love story. Or, okay, this is interesting to me. This is what will happen then. The character will meet, uh, let's say, a love interest. O yan, that's B. Okay? So, ano yung susunod sa B? Okay? So, in our case, because we have already an expectation of what a love story, for example, is, so, okay, this is the next thing that will happen. Okay? So, what follows, so people assume, for example, okay, ito na yung susunod na mangyayari. This is letter C. So, A, B, C dapat because your assumption is it's going to be in alphabetical order. But then, some films, okay, here the form takes you by surprise because, A, B, and then A. The expectation, ang sabi mo, C dapat yung susunod. Biglang, ay, bakit naging A? Okay, what happened? Why is A, why did A appear again? So, A, B, A. Okay? So, here, form takes us a little by surprise. If we are puzzled by a formal development, then we just read on expectations and try again. What follows AB? Diba? What follows A, B, A? So, as for you, because you are a logical human being, somewhat you follow, susunod yan, A, B, A, C, and then A, D. So, it can happen that way. Okay? So now here AB, AC, here the main possibilities were either AB, AB, or AC, AC. Note that your expectations limit the possibility as well as the selected item. So you will never, let's say, think about, oh no, it's AZ, AB, and then AZ, or AB, AX. So it will not work that way. It does not have a logical pattern to it. Okay, AB, AB, AB. Okay. It can make sense because there is a pattern. Now, AB, AC, it also makes sense because again, it follows a certain pattern. Now, if you expected AB, and you still should be able to make a strong hypothesis about the letters because again, it's arranged in a logical order. Diba? AB, AC. So what follows, maybe it's AD. Di ba? So, when you say A, B, A, C, and then another A, okay. So, susunod na niyan is AD. Okay? Simple as this game is, it illustrates the involving power of form. You as a viewer or listener, don't simply let the parts parade uh, past you. Okay? You enter into an active participation with them. That's why when you watch film, you always anticipate what's going to happen. And then, when that satisfies you, then galing na galing ka sa sarili mo. Diba? Sabi ko na ganyan yung mangyayari. Okay? But then, films, actually, some interesting films, surprise you, ay, bakit ganun yung nangyari? Okay? When that expectation your expectation is actually violated, you can either experience two things, positive or negative. Positive if you're pleasantly surprised. Ay, hindi ko naisip yun Pwede pala na ganun yung mangyari. Or negative, ay, dapat hindi naman ganun yung nangyari. Because, diba? So, it's not logical. Okay. Diba? That's what ABAC that's what the ABAC game is. So somewhat you as a human being of a logical mind, of sound mind, actually thinks of the things that will happen next. Okay? So in a way, that is how films work. That's how films engage its audience. Okay. One way in which form affects the experience is to keep in mind the idea that in a film, everything is there. The character seen earlier reaping once again, for example. Or let's say, for example, the filmmakers actually give you context clues. Okay. More often than not, we perceive things in film quite differently than in real life, of course. Film form makes us see and perceive things anew. Diba? So again, reference to the ABAC game. Okay? So AB, AC, susunod, maybe if we see an A again, it's AD. And then AE. Okay? So that's a logical order. Okay, so ito yung mangyayari dyan because I've seen a lot of films. Most likely, this is what happens in a love story, or this is what happens in an action adventure story, etc. Conventions and experiences. Now, in relation to the ABAC game, how do we do that? We do that through context and of course prior experience. Kasi nga, diba, you have watched a lot of films before that belongs in this particular genre. So chances are the elements are going to be the same somewhat. Yeah. So again, if your expectation is now violated or your prior experience was not really validated, then you become either pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised. Okay? So ibig sabihin, there are conventions in creating films, or there are conventions in films. Diba? There are dominant styles, traditions, and popular forms and common elements in different artworks, especially in film. Diba? That's the reason why we have genres. Diba? That's the reason why we can classify films as action, as drama, as comedy, because action films, drama films, and other genres have basically similar elements into it. Now, our ability to spot clues, to see them as forming systems, and to create expectations is guided by our real life or prior experience and our knowledge of artistic conventions. Especially for us, for example, na aral into aral sa filmmaking. So we have more context, we have more knowledge and creating expositions or creating or telling a story. Now, because artworks are human creations, the creator wouldn't be able to avoid relating his work to other ones and different aspects of the world in general. So, kailangan talaga merong paghuhugutan. Okay? Now, films make us appreciate new conventions and unexpected elements. Okay? So, one of the reason why, let's say, a film becomes very very popular is that when expectations are violated in a positive way, right? So when it surprises you, or ito nga yung sinasabi natin na ano na 'di ba, twist, okay, plot twist. So if it surprises you, then 'di ba, it makes you appreciate, this can work pala, so this is good because it surprised me. Emotions represented within the film interacts as part of the film system. The spectator's emotional response can be inspired by prior experience, but form can also elicit new ones. Okay, so expectation spurs emotions. Those we may find mundane in real life may be spellbinding in films. So yung reversal of emotions. Okay? There are several kinds like delayed fulfillment, so yung anxiety, sympathy, and despair. Gratified expectation, so satisfaction, relief, or euphoria. And cheated expectation, puzzlement, keener interest, and disappointment. So these are the emotions that that films can actually elicit from its audience. Now, like emotion, meaning is important to our consumption and experience of artwork. Okay, so what are the meanings? So there are four what we call referential meaning. So it is the concrete plot summary. You have the explicit meaning, the point of the film. Openly asserted meaning, how do all the film's meaning relate to one another? So you have implicit meaning. So this is more abstract. So yung referential is okay. This is the genre. Okay, if I'm watching an adventure film, so this is what I want to do. Why? Because I already have a reference. Okay, explicit meaning, it's what the film particular what the specific film is all about. Ano yung sinasabi ng film? Now, when we say implicit meaning, this is more abstract. This goes beyond what is explicitly stated in the film. Okay? Expectations vary. A search should not leave behind particular or concrete features of a film. Like, for example, the film, let's say, Avatar. Diba? It's an action-adventure animation film, CG animation film, that has a very a deep meaning. For example, although it's what we're talking about are aliens, for example, that we can relate to our culture here in Earth. Then how humanity is corrupt and how the indigenous peoples are being exploited, etc. So yun yung implicit meaning nun. You cannot really tell the audience the implicit meaning. They have to figure it out for themselves. And then you have symptomatic meaning. So describing a film's meaning by explaining a particular set of social values that make up the point of the film. Okay? So meaning, after all, is a social phenomenon. Again, so meanings will depend on the interpretation of the audience. Okay? So what are the principles of film form? So one, you have it must be assumed that every element in a motion picture has one or more functions. Again, this is the element of the mise en scene. Okay, that every single image, sound, dialogue in the film is actually put there by purpose. Okay, film does not always depend on the filmmaker's intention. In some instance, this is not really the intention of the filmmaker, but then the audience or majority of the audience actually appreciate it in that particular way. Okay? Next, what is the element doing there? How does it want me to respond? So again, so the process of you creating your own meanings through the images that you have watched. Okay? And this for this reason, we have motivation or the reasons for a character's action and any elements that the viewer justifies on some grounds. Okay? So there is always motivation. Okay? An audience can forgive a person for killing, halimbawa sa sa screen, sa film. An audience can actually forgive the character for killing, from killing, if, for example, the person that he or she killed did something bad to her in the past. Di ba? Kasi kita natin yung you see, for example, a person killing a character, kasi, di ba? Let's say, for example, John Wick killing the person who killed his dog and, di ba? And stole his car. So, even though killing in real life is bad and it's a very serious offense and serious crime, but because of the storytelling aspect of it, because the character's motivation. So when John Wick, for example, the antagonist, the protagonist actually killed one of the antagonists, so okay lang yun. So he deserved it, diba? Now, the principles of film form. So you have a similarity of repetition. Okay? A similarity and repetition. So recall and identify characters and setting each time they reappear. Okay? So when you talk about similarity and repetition, you're talking about also motive. Okay? Motive is any significant repeated element in a film, may it be an object, a place, a person, a sound, a character trait, etc. Okay? Parallelism means film cues or the spectator to compare two or more distinct elements by highlighting its similarity. Okay? So I'm going to give you an example of how it works. So in this particular case, the filmmaker actually used color to basically divide the mood of the scenes depending on what it is. So I'm going to show you. So, of course, you see the difference of the scene depends on the colors of the set. Okay? So, emotions differ from one scene to another depending on the colors that you have seen. Okay? So, it is used for motif. Okay? So, from red to green, for example, because green is jealous, diba? Green can represent jealousy. Okay, and then to blue, loneliness, sadness, and then all the way to the next transition of colors. Okay? So the filmmaker actually used colors in order for the film to basically to support the emotions of the film visually. Okay? Uh, Variety, contrast, change is needed. Okay? When you say difference and variation. Now, even though motifs are repeated, it is seldom uh, that they are repeated exactly. Of course, there are variety pa rin. Okay? Even though colors are repeated, for example, or let's say in The Godfather where the orange represents death, so it's presented, of course, in different ways pa rin. Okay? Now, conflict between characters is most common formal opposition. Okay? Now, repetition and variation, to notice one is to notice the other. Okay? So you see, or as an audience, we see patterns inside the film that we are watching. So this is an example of repetition and variation.
Take Pete's car, we drive over to Mum's, we go in, take care of Philip. I'm so sorry, Philip. Then we grab Mum, we go over to Liz's place, hold up, have a cup of tea, and wait for all this to blow over. Why have we got to go to Liz's? Because we do. She dumped you. I have to know if she's all right. Why? Because I love her. All right, okay. I'm not staying there though. Why not? If we hole up, I want to be somewhere familiar. I want to know where the exits are, and I want to be allowed to smoke. Okay. Take Pete's car, go around.
So now it's more of repetition, but again, it is somewhat different from the previous one.
Pick her up, bring her back here, have a cup of tea, and wait for all this to blow over. Perfect. No, 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 wait, you can't bring her back here. Why not? Well, it's not exactly safe, is it? Yeah. Good state of it. Where's safe? Where's familiar? Where can I smoke? Take the car, go to Mum's, kill Phil, sorry, grab Liz, go to the Winchester, have a nice cold pint, and wait for all this to blow over. How's that for a slice of front golf? Yeah, boy!
Okay? Another repetition and variation example. So, as you can see, the filmmaker actually uses a series of images in repetition, but in somewhat a varied way to create a pattern, but it is not monotonous. Okay? Development. When you say development, it is the progression, moving from the start through the middle to the final scenes. Okay? Segmentation, the writer outline of the film to analyze the film's pattern of development. Okay, that's the reason why we segment our films into, let's say, three acts. So we have Act One, we have Act Two, and Act Three. So that in a way we can organize the ideas of the film, and then in some way we can connect Act One from Act Two, and then we can progress from Act Two to Act Three. So compare beginning and the end, so to speak. Then you have unity and disunity. All of the relationships among the elements in a film creates a total filmic system where when all relationships are clearly established, the film has unity. It gives us a sense of completeness and closure. So that's the reason pag sinasabi natin that the film is, 'di ba, airtight. For example, so everything is plausible. Now the story doesn't have a hole on it, 'di ba? Even an ununified film may contain fragmented or loosely connected elements or answered or unanswered questions. Okay, sometimes viewers overlook the disunity because of certain conventions. Now, in some instance, the film is intentionally disunified. Why? Because that is how the actor, that is how the filmmaker wants the idea to be presented. Hence, for example, David Lynch films, that there are some instances that you really feel disconnected, but the feeling of disconnected is one of the things that the director wants you to feel. He or she wants you to feel confused. Okay, so again, it's a matter of intention. So unity and disunity. Okay. Also, you can add in narrative, a chain of events in cause-effect relationship occurring in the time and space. So begins with one situation, then a series of changes occurs according to a pattern of cause and effect. Okay, a situation arises that brings about the end of the narrative. So actually, ito yung ano, 'di ba, progression of the story. Okay? Engagement with the story depends on the understanding of the patterns of change and stability, cause and effect, and time and space. Okay? In terms of narration, so it really depends on how the story is being unraveled to its audience. Okay? The plot and the story. Okay, so the principles of narrative form. So you have a story. A story, of course, is a set of all events in a narrative, both explicitly represented and inferred in chronological order. So that's the story. So this is what happens in chronological order. But in some instance, of course, uh, chronological order is not really presented, or in terms of chronology, in some instance, 'di ba, some films present this continuous chronological order, so to speak. Then you have the plot, everything visible and audible before us, including non-diegetic elements. So when you say diegetic, it is the internal world created by the story that the characters experience and encounter. Okay? So example of diegetic that is used on film or in film.
I woke up this morning with the sun down.
This is sort of a fantasy sequence. Okay? Now, of course, this will not exist in reality, but we see it because we see what the character perceives. Okay? So, kumbaga, it's like a montage sequence, so to speak. So, di ba, the character singing and dancing does not happen in real life. A montage sequence does not happen in real life. But we see this because this is what we perceive that the plot actually creates this particular world of the character. Okay? Cause and effect, mostly triggered by the character, creates causes and registers effects. So that's the motivated cause. Now, the character has traits, attitude, skills, habits, taste, psychological drives, are complex and three-dimensional. Okay? So if this is your character, then of course, um, it creates a more interesting, rounded character, so to speak. It's not a natural or stereotypical flat character. Okay? A character is given traits that will play causal roles in the overall story action. Okay? It can also be triggered by events or circumstances. And we seek to connect the events by means of cause and effect. So, this is the reason why this character did it. Diba? Ito yung para, kumbaga, this is the reason. Okay, kaya pala siya ganon. Diba? Kaya pala siya nagagalit dito sa character na to because let's say when you see the flashback, okay. So something happened, nagkaroon tayo ng backstory. Now, that's the cause and effect. Okay, so now it makes sense why this character is this way particularly. Why? Because something happened to this character back then. Diba? Pero kung hindi ipe-present yun, then we don't have really a notion or we don't really have a clue kung bakit ganun yung character. Kasi hindi natin nakikita yung motivations niya. So the cause and the effect. But again, this is depending on if we are going to be for a filmmaker, if you're going to see if you're going to present the cause before the effect. Okay? In some instance, 'di ba? Again, the director or the filmmaker actually confuses us. Why? Because somewhat the film is presented in a non-chronological order. So for cause and effect, you have causal motivation. Okay, when you say causal motivation, ito yung plant and payoff. So planting of information in advance of a scene and then using it after. So for example, um, diba? You see, let's say, a knife that is presented in a film, and then later on, that knife will be used to protect the main character. Okay, I'm going to show you videos of it later. So next you have withhold cause and show effect. Now the plot is trying to discover what the cause was. Okay, and how and because again ito yung sinasabi natin na during the beginning, iba we don't really know or we don't really have an idea bakit ganito yung character, why is the character acting this way. Okay, so somewhat the filmmaker withholds. Okay, some films withhold the cause. Okay, next is present the cause but withhold the effects. Okay, causes suspense and anxiety for the audience. Okay, this is causal motivation. So explained.
Hey, remember this unicorn? We're going to talk more about setup and payoff. A couple days ago, I got this comment in response to the Suicide Squad review. So let's quickly do a clearer dive into what's really the essence of setup and payoff. Now, in the previous video, I mentioned the rule of threes, where an element will be set up, then there's a reminder, and then finally a payoff. This idea meshes with another dramatic principle of Chekhov's gun. Anton Chekhov was a prolific Russian author and playwright in the mid-late 1800s. He believed strongly in narrative efficiency and thought stories should have formal rules of construction, which is why we have the phrase Chekhov's gun. Remove everything that has no relevance to the story. If you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter, it absolutely must go off.
If it's not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging there. The unicorn in Suicide Squad is unusual. It's an absurdist element. It breaks from expectations and thus definitionally calls attention to itself. This is why we, or at least I, expect something to come of it. Now let's go back and look at that comment. Wouldn't the title card be the intro when we first see it, the reminder, and then the fight, the payoff? Now, the comment makes a critical error in evaluating the rule of threes, which is holding too tightly to the idea of three. The idea isn't just that something should show up three times, but as per Chekhov's gun, it should do something. Even though the unicorn appears or is referenced three different times, none of these actually come to anything. Three is really just a convenient number. It has a good rhythm, and once something has happened three times in a row, we instinctively start to feel like it is intentional rather than random. Three is indicative of a pattern. Even simpler than the psychology of patterns, though, is just basic information juggling, managing the human memory. If someone is watching a movie or a play or television, they're actually taking in a lot of information at a more or less constant rate for upwards of several hours. The reminder stage of the rule of threes is really just about helping the audience keep track of something set up in the first 20 minutes that's not going to be relevant for another 2 hours. If the span of time between setup and payoff is much shorter, then there's no need for a reminder because it's still fresh in the audience's mind. Well, if the time between is much, much longer, then either you'll need more reminders or you'll just need to spend more time embedding it in the audience's memory. But even that still isn't getting to the heart of the issue, and to do that, we're going to take a look at an episode of The Simpsons. Season 3, Bart's Friend Falls in Love, centers around Bart and Milhouse having a falling out over the new girl in class. At the start of the episode, Milhouse shows Bart his new magic 8-ball. They ask it several questions, and the 8-ball predicts that they won't be friends by the end of the day. Sure enough, Milhouse falls in love with Samantha, the new girl in class. Bart resents the change in his relationship with Milhouse, and the two have a falling out that culminates in Bart snitching on Samantha to her father, who has her transferred to a private girls' school. Feeling guilty about the grief he's caused Milhouse, Bart confesses to Milhouse, and Milhouse attacks him. Bart grabs the 8-ball and hits Milhouse in the head, breaking it. So this is all over within a half hour, including commercial breaks. So there's not really any pressing need for a reminder, just the setup and the payoff. The setup is that the introduction of the 8-ball into the relationship heralds the forming of a rift, while the payoff is that the violent destruction of the 8-ball marks the healing of that rift. A peaceful, friendly interaction with the 8-ball moves the emotional state into chaos. A chaotic, violent interaction moves the emotional state into peace. The 8-ball being used for its intended purpose brings discord, brings a prophecy that dooms the protagonist, and the destruction of the 8-ball, using it as a weapon, breaks the curse and breaks the power of the 8-ball over the relationship. The writer could have used anything for this gag, but by using the 8-ball, it forms an emotionally satisfying loop, which is the essence of payoff. A stuffed unicorn flying out of Boomerang's jacket isn't emotionally satisfying. Hey, remember?
Okay, this is an sample video of withholding costs and showing the effect.
Man, what? Don't open your eyes. Break away glass, but it can still cut you. Take it easy. It's quite fun.
So in a way, the audience is left with why did he jump? Why did he jump? Why did the character jump? Only to show that it is all just a game. It is a setup.
It's your birthday present. Get you something. I'm such an asshole. Ladies and gentlemen, my brother Nicholas Van Ork.
Next is present the cause but withhold effect.
There's a gun by his head. There's no proof. One warning. We need him alive. Lecter, put your hands on your head. On the leg. No movement. Johnny, hold your fire. We're coming in with the car. We're opening the hatch. Just hands. City fire will come from us. Affirm.
So in the narrative, you see that the antagonist, in this case Hannibal Lecter, was suspected to be inside the elevator shaft. Basically, he's dead already. So that's the cause. Only to find out that, well, Lecter is still alive also. So in a way, it withholds the effect of the character being dead. Okay. Now, another principle of narrative form is what we call time. So we construct the story time based on what the plot presents. Okay, chronological order but irrelevant action skipped over. So of course, if for example a film is spans from let's say 30 years or even a year, so you cannot really present all the things that happened to the character for 30 years. So you have to select things that are significant to the narration. Okay? So the viewer is engaged in trying to put events in order and assign duration and frequency. So this happens also, di ba? When we watch, say for example, the Avengers, or we watch certain series of films, for example, or di ba, trilogy. So we figure out saan nangyari to at at what time frame, kailan, and basically, so in a way we figure out the time element or the sequences, the chronological order of the film. Okay? So when you say temporal order, so order of the story or events either chronologically or non-chronological. Okay, we mentally rearrange them according to our understanding of logic. So even though, let's say, for example, Chris Nolan films are not arranged in chronological order, so but somewhat we make sense of it. So in our heads, we actually find time or actually figure out, okay, this happens before this or this happens before that particular scene. Okay? So that's non-chronological order. So it's easier if you present the story in chronological order. But of course, it depends on the effect that the story teller wants to uh, put across. Okay? So when talking about time, you have story duration or the period of time referred to in the film. So then you have plot duration. It includes stretches of time depicted in the film. So you have story direction, the period of time, the whole 30 years, for example. And then you have plot duration where, okay, the plot, the story with that 30 years are actually nitpicked into several different sequences. Okay? And then you have the screen duration or the length of the film. Okay, filmmakers can manipulate the screen duration regardless of the story and the plot duration. Okay, let's say for example, the Justice League Snyder cut. Diba? You have the original cut, which is about 2.5 hours long, and then you have the Snyder cut, which is 4 hours long. Okay, so essentially they have the same plot, they have the same set of characters, and they actually are the same film, but okay, the filmmaker actually manipulated. Okay, this is what happens. Okay, so the length of the film actually is manipulated by the filmmaker. So screen duration can select from the plot duration. Can select from the plot duration. So you have story duration, the bigger one. Then you have plot duration, and then you have the screen duration. Okay. Now, when you say temporal frequency, the number of times an element or a fragment of the story is represented in the plot. So, um, of course, we have temporal ellipsis, the shortening of the plot duration of a film achieved by deliberately omitting intervals or sections of the narratives or the story. Okay, I'm going to show you as an example of temporal frequency. Okay, so this makes sense because when you repeat as a particular action several times in the film, then it makes sense. It is embedded in the memory of the audience. So when it happens, it becomes part of the storytelling process. Okay. So in this particular film, this is called Face Off. So the main character or the protagonist actually does this action the to his family. Okay? So because it is repeated several different times, so it is that particular action becomes significant. Now, when John Travolta, the character of John Travolta, was transferred to the character of Nicolas Cage, okay, the only way to identify that this is the father is through that particular action. So hence temporal frequency is achieved, 'di ba? Okay? And then you have temporal ellipsis where it is cut uh, for purposes of saying that a particular character has done this several different times, or in a way it suggests that he has been here for a long time. Okay, after time you have space. Now you have two types of spaces in a narrative. Okay, the story space where the story takes place. The plot also let us infer other spaces, and then you have screen space. The visible space within the frame can select the portion of the plot space. So you have the story space, and then you have the screen space. Okay. Next are patterns and developments. Okay. Of course, for patterns, you have openings. It provides a basis of for what is to come, and it initiates us into the narrative. Okay. In a way, it is the exposition, the beginning of the story. So we have different setups, or we have different ways on how to do an opening. There is this what we and that there is this thing that we call in media res, okay, or in the middle of things, where like for example in the Saw movies, where uh, when the character opens their eyes, they are already inside the cage, or the room, the locked room, and they do not know how they came, uh, or how they were put in that room. Okay, So you are put in the middle of the action. Okay, next is exposition. It lays out important story events and the character traits in the opening situation. And then you have the setup, the first quarter of the film to set up or to again basically introduce the characters and introduce the plot points. Okay. Now the patterns of plot development, you have change in knowledge, you have goal orientation or goal oriented plot or investigation, you have time and space, and then you have cycles or here we go again. So when we talk about change in knowledge, ayan. So a film, for example, can um, uh, be positioned and for the opening as change of knowledge. For example, um, end of the world films, diba? That somewhat it is just a normal day-to-day occurrence of a normal life, and then something happened, like okay, the Earth's core did not move, or aliens come about. So the change from being a normal, being normal that we are going to exist from day to day to an information that the world is actually changing or the world is actually going to an end, diba? Okay, when you say goal-oriented plot or investigation, something happened and then the character actually has a goal that he or she wants to achieve. Okay, let's say for example, the character's mother or father was murdered, and then the character goes into a journey of investigating who killed his parent, okay, or her parent, and then what is he going to do when he finds out. Okay, then you have time and space where uh, simple act where a slice of life, for example, in this particular time, what is happening. Okay, so and then you have cycles where when you say here we go again, di ba? Groundhog Day, for example, where the um, the day is going to be repeated. Diba? Yung paulit-ulit yung araw when the character wakes up, so he is actually stuck in one particular day. Okay? So here we go again. So this is an example of exposition. There is actually a narrator describing the plot at the beginning of the film. So in a way, the narration actually sets up the audience's expectation before watching the entire film.
he's a lazy man. And the dude was most certainly that, quite possibly the laziest in Los Angeles County, which would place him high in the running for laziest worldwide. But sometimes there's a man, sometimes there's a man. Wow, lost my train of thought here. But hell, I done introduced him enough.
This will not stand. This aggression against Kuwait. Here on the range I belong, drifting along with the tumbling tumbleweed.
Okay, next. So for patterns and development, the spectator creates a specific expectations. Film form trains the viewers so expectation becomes more precise. Diba? The more that we become fans of a particular genre, the more that we can predict what will happen if we watch a film that belongs to that particular genre. Okay, and then you have the ending, the climax, the highest point. The action is presented as having a narrow range of possibilities, and it settles casual issues in the film. Okay, so for ending, you have the highest possible emotional part, which is the climax, and in some instance, other films have this thing called open ending. This encourages us to imagine what happens next, to reflect on what would have fulfilled our expectation. Kumbaga, it ends just too abruptly, but not the point that the story is not resolved, but basically the filmmaker actually tries the audience, makes the audience imagine, okay, this is really what will happen to it. So it's up to the audience's interpretation what the ending will be. Okay. The narration is the plot's way of distributing story information to achieve specific effects. A moment by moment process that guides us in building the story out of the plot. Okay. It gives cues in ways that hold information for curiosity and surprise. And it may create expectations or increase suspense if plot supplies the information. So in some instances, people actually, or filmmakers actually, include narration in their films. Okay, so narration, it will depend on, number one, the range of the story information, how much information the viewer is given. So is it going to be unrestricted or omniscient narration, where the viewer knows more and hears more than any characters? Or is it going to be the restricted narration, where the viewer's knowledge is restricted to that of the main character? So kung ano yung alam nung, meron ganun eh, kung ano yung alam nung main character, yun lang din yung alam ng viewer. Or yung sinasabi nating omniscient is mas maraming alam yung viewer kaysa doon sa main character. So which is better? So it depends on how it is presented. Okay, so these are the examples of depths of story information. Okay, well, depth of story information refers to how deeply the plot plunges the viewers into the character's psychological state. So how do you take the audience for a ride, so to speak? So you have objective depth, where we see only the external behavior, no access to the character's internal state. So para kang you're just looking at a person in real life, where you don't really know what he or she is thinking or what he or she is feeling, depending on the visual cues that you will see, diba? Yun yung objective, yung you're just a third person actually witnessing things unravel and the characters react to the situation. And then you have subjective depth, where access of character's mental state and perspective. So now, when you say subjective depth, now the viewer has access to the character's mental state. Paano? Through, let's say, for example, voiceovers. So naririnig mo yung thoughts ng characters. Nagsasalita siya sa utak niya and naririnig ng audience. That's subjective depth. Okay? Perceptual subjectivity, access to the character's optical and sound perspective. So hindi lang yung naririnig mo yung na iniisip ng audience, ang perceptual subjectivity, nakikita mo rin yung nakikita ng character. And of course, you have mental subjectivity. This is the deepest. Okay, the access to the character's dreams and visions. Okay? So, kahit yung mga panaginip, yung imagination of the character, so nakikita rin ng audience. I'm going to give you some samples. So, this is the example of subjective depth, where the character's mental state, okay, and perspective is seen by the audience or is experienced by the audience as well. Yan. So now you hear the thoughts of the character. Okay, next is subjective depth, where you access the character's mental state and perspective. So subjective depth, basically, you know what the character is thinking exactly and what the character is seeing exactly. Okay? Now you have perceptual subjectivity, the character's access to optical and sound perspective. So you see what the character is seeing through his eyes or her eyes. Okay. And then this is the combination of perceptual subjectivity and subjective depth. Okay, where you have the access to the character's optical and sound perspective and the visions that he or she is seeing also. In this case, you see the character's uh, perception and the visions that he sees because he is high on drugs. So this is what a person that is high on drugs sees.
I remember your face. There is no way to explain how terrified. I was pouring sweat. My blood is too thick for about it. I've never been able to properly explain myself in this way. Good. He's home. Name? Frank? Press affiliation. Nothing else. Ignore this terrible drug. Pretend it's nothing. Go do. On the list. Free lunch. On the list. Coverage. Where my attorney? With me? His name is not on that list. But we must have a suite. Must have that suite. What's the score? What's next?
Your suite isn't ready yet, but someone was looking for you.
Oh, we haven't done anything yet. Oh.
I can handle this. Smell something. Medicine. Very sweet once. We'll be in the park.
Okay. And then you have mental subjectivity, where you have access to the character's dreams and visions. So in this case, this is Happy Gilmore. This is his happy place, so to speak.
Happy, look who's here. Grandma. Happy, you look upset. What's wrong?
Don't say I stink. I'm not gonna win.
That's always sweet. House isn't important. It's just the house.
Stop fraternizing with the help, Gilmore. Just hit your ball if you can find it. Hey, Grandma.
Get it. I just want you to be happy.
Grandma wants me to be happy.
So of course, this does not happen naman in real life, but this is in a way part of his imagination. Okay? Uh, Seeing the mental state increases our sympathy and can cue expectations about what the character will say or do later. Objectivity can be an effective way of withholding information. Okay? In a way, films insert subjective moments in an overall framework of objectivity. So one of the examples of which is flashbacks. Okay? So flashbacks treated as a mental subjectivity but can become objective once you're in the memory. Okay, so that's the difference between objective and subjective perception. Now, there are some non-narrative formal systems that filmmakers actually use. Okay. Now, the boundaries between documentary and film and fiction, for example. Now, you have a non-narrative formal system there. Now, the Godfather, for instance, is purely fictional, but we care about the Corleone family anyway. If something's fictional, it doesn't mean that it is not connected in some ways to real life. Okay? So we, even though the characters are fictional, so in a way we place the character's traits, or really relate the character to somewhat of a real person that we have experienced, or that we have interacted with, so to speak. So when you look at Harry Potter, even though Harry Potter is a fictional character, then in a way he's a friend that you grew up with, diba? Or if you look at um, Iron Man or Captain America, these are fictional characters, but some way you strive to be like them. Not like them literally, but the traits that they actually portray. Okay, now, history and geography often contextualize fictional events. So, in some ways, the backdrop is historical, but the stories inside that backdrop is fictional. Okay, so fictional films also comment on the real world, so to speak. So sometimes, though, the boundaries between documentary and fiction is blurred. Okay, mockumentaries, experimental documentaries, and film, and Oliver Stone JFK, for example, is a blurring of what is this? Is this fiction, or is this a documentary? Okay. Now, for examples, this is history and geography often contextualize fictional events. Uh, this is a historical. It's not a historical film, meaning it's not. It did not happen in real life, or it is inspired by true events, but again, the contextualized. So the film, let's say, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters to Iwo Jima. Yeah. It actually happened in real life. Okay? But the story, the narration of the film actually is fictional.
Almost all on its own, turned that around.
Maybe they're all dead. What do you think, Doc? You think they're all dead?
Captain Severance asked me who else is in that picture.
Tell them it was me. They pick someone dead.
They don't want somebody dead. They want to ship us back to the States.
Heroes of Iwo Jima.
Everybody wants to meet you guys. Just some simple things he wants you to say. Mostly, buy bonds.
You know, I think this whole damn thing is a farce.
If we don't raise $14 billion, this war's over by the end of the month.
As far as us,
Being the heroes of Iwo Jima, that's just not the case. The real heroes are dead on that island.
Knowing he was with you that day and seeing him in that photograph, I don't know why it makes me feel better, but it does.
it's so silly, Peach.
You can't take them calling me a hero.
Some of the things I saw, God, they weren't things to be proud of.
All right. Okay. Um, that's the end of my lecture about film form. Okay. The source of the lecture that I've given you is Bordell and Thompson's Film Art and Introduction, 8th edition. Okay. Thank you very much for your patience and for spending time. I hope you learned something. Okay. See you in my next video, and please keep healthy and keep safe. Thank you very much.